Okay. So for those who were not able to join us this morning, I talked a little bit about the exam, the final exam, the final lecture exam has 100 questions and you have 100 minutes to do it. The first set of questions you'll see, it will be 50 questions on the old material, multiple choice, covers exam 1, 2, and 3. So those 50 questions are divided for all of those chapters. So there's only going to be about 2 to 3 questions per chapter from the old materials. Then the second half of the final exam is 50 questions, and it's going to cover the urinary, endocrine, female, and male reproductive. So those 50 questions are divided into these 4 chapters. So you can see that there's going to be about 10 to 12 questions per chapter. So a lot more details in these. And the same format as your other exams. 40 of those questions are multiple choice and 10 are short answers. So you type it in at the end. And then for lab, pretty much straightforward, 50 questions, 25 on the old materials and 25 on the new materials. You type in the answers, you identify structures, or remember that some of our old materials was based on terminology. So understanding, for example, what's the region, what's your elbow called, or what's the region that your feet is called, and so on. So there are those types as well. And then for everything in the lab, spelling does count. And you have 50 minutes to do the 50 questions. For both of these, respondents and webcam is required. It is extremely important to do a thorough environmental scan. So if I see one where it's just you and you're not moving, showing me your room, I cannot grade that exam. Okay. Your exam date is you have from Friday until Sunday to take it, versus in the past you had from Saturday to Monday. So kind of remember that. And that is the logistics. Any questions on that before I move into the content? Oh, I don't have my chat on. Now I am. Awesome. Okay. So we talked about the urinary system. We spent most of the time on the urinary system, talking about the gross anatomy, the nephron, and that's pretty much as far as we got this morning. And we will come back to this and talk about the urine formation, which has 3 main steps: glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. Okay, so these 2 slides right here, slide 9 and slide 10, are what covers the urinary formation. So I will come back to that. But I just want to make sure I have time for the reproductive. We did not get a chance to go through the endocrine system. So in the endocrine system, some of the objectives that you need to know are: what are the functions of the endocrine system, be able to define the hormones and describe its role in the endocrine system, as well as describe glands that play a role in the endocrine system. So here are kind of the basic things. So you want to know what the hormone is called, its name, where is it secreted / produced, and luckily where it is secreted / produced is the same place except for 2 hormones. Which 2 am I talking about?
Oxytocin and ADH.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. So for every other hormone that I'm making you know, where they are secreted is where they are produced. The only 2 that do not fall into that is the oxytocin and the antidiuretic hormone. Okay.
So they're not produced in the posterior pituitary.
Correct. Where are they produced?
The hypothalamus, I guess.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Okay, there was a question on our quiz. I know why I missed the one. The hypothalamus releases its own hormones to control the release of hormones from both the anterior and posterior lobes. Is the posterior lobe the part that's false?
Say that one more time.
The question was the hypothalamus. It's a true or false question. The hypothalamus releases its own hormones to control the release of hormones from both the anterior and posterior lobes of the pituitary gland.
Yes.
So that's, so what part of that is false? The posterior part?
Right, because it produces the glands for those, so it doesn't necessarily control the posterior pituitary gland.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. So that was your question you had then? You remembered?
Yeah,
Okay.
I went back and looked at my quiz because I got confused on just what you just said, what the posterior, pituitary gland produces, or actually doesn't produce, but secretes.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. So someone had a quick question. Do you see these slides for us to look over? Yes, I always send you these slides, and actually you should have them. Did I not send an email with the morning session and the slides?
Yeah, I saw it.
Okay. All right. Yep. So it should be in there. Okay. All right. So I gave you kind of a starting point to start off with, but you want to make sure you also do what I did here for the other hormones as well. So it's easiest, I think, one of the ways, and you can do it multiple ways, but one way that is I found easy for students to learn is to first figure out where they're produced and released, and then from there just list the hormones. Okay, so I've start with the anterior pituitary gland, the posterior pituitary gland. I did make a note that this is where it's released but not produced. And then you would continue this list by putting in like the pancreas, the thyroid gland, and the adrenal glands, and so on. And then listing all the hormones that it produces. Okay. And not only do you list the hormones that they produce, but also what do they target and what is their action. So for example, growth hormone, also known as GH or HGH, H in front means human growth hormone. It targets various cells, including bone cells, muscle cells. What is its action? It stimulates growth, both in number and in size. Okay, so you can see that I did that for all of the hormones that are produced and secreted in the anterior pituitary gland. And then I also did that for the posterior pituitary gland. And again, name of the hormone, where does it target, and what is its action? Okay, so I did it for the pituitary gland, so you'll need to do it for all the other glands as well that you're responsible for knowing. Okay. All right. Then the female reproductive system. The learning objectives for these include understand the following terms. What's a gamete? What's fertilization? What's zygote? What's chromosomes? And cell division. Okay. So we'll briefly go through these. What's a gamete again?
It's your, the sex cell.
Yep. So these are the sex cells, and they include
Sperm and egg.
Yep. Okay. What's fertilization?
When sperm and egg meet.
Be a little bit more specific.
When they meet and complete meiosis, maybe.
So sperm penetrates the egg, or we can say that there's a combination. It's more of what it results in than what it is, but it results in a combination of chromosomes. Half from mom, half from dad. Okay, and what that result is called then is a zygote. Okay, and what are chromosomes then?
The number of DNA.
DNA, yeah. And what's DNA?
Our code?
Yeah, genetic code. Very good. Okay, so DNA essentially are chromosomes are form of your DNA. So you have autosomes, which are chromosomes that have identical copies. So chromosome 1, chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 2. Then you have sex chromosomes, are ones that are not necessarily identical, but they code for gender. Okay, so you have the X and the Y, where here you have chromosomes 1 through 22. Okay, if you have 23 chromosomes, what do we call that? A cell with 23 chromosomes is called a
1N haploid.
haploid. Very good. And if a cell has 46 chromosomes, it's called
Diploid.
diploid. Very good. Okay, so gametes are which ones?
Is it like the haploid?
The
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, very good. Then cell division is when a cell divides, and there are two possible ways in which it can divide, through meiosis and mitosis. Can you explain what mitosis and meiosis is? Let's do a quick compare and contrast. So we've got mitosis versus meiosis.
I think meiosis is like when you like divide into half, it's become like diploid, and then mitosis it just keeps it divides, but it's like growing. I don't remember that much about it from biology. Yeah, copy and divide.
They both copy and divide, actually. Yeah, yep. So they're both forms of cell division. So they're both similar in that they're both cell division.
Yeah, because meiosis will have like 4 different cells at the end, and mitosis only has 2, right?
So meiosis, there you go. So meiosis does divide twice, okay? Well, actually it divides once, but it divides first and then it copies, no, you're right, it divides. So the first step is it divides, and the second step is that it copies and it divides. So the order in which things happen are a little bit different, okay? So they're both forms of cell division, and they both start off with 46 chromosomes in one cell, okay? But in mitosis, it copies and divides.
You still have 46 at the end.
Exactly. And not only that, but these 46 cells, these cells that have 46 chromosomes, they are what? Different or the same?
Identical.
Identical, exactly. So the resulting cells after the cell division is identical to each other, as well as identical to the original. Okay. In meiosis, it's going to divide.
And it's gonna have different results.
Exactly. And what are the different results?
It has half the DNA. I can't remember the difference between meiosis 1 and 2. That's where I got hung up at.
So the difference
Set
is
polar bodies.
well, it depends, right? So we won't talk about polar bodies until we get to the differences between male and female reproductive systems, cycles. But in general, in meiosis, you'll find that here, look at here, from 46 to 2 cells that are 23. How's that different from mitosis?
Half your chromosomes.
Yeah, it didn't copy. It just divided.
So you're gonna have half the DNA?
Yep. So from 46, you divide by 2, that's 23. So in the first step, it just divides. Okay, so meiosis 1 is just a pure division. In meiosis 2, that's when you have a copy and divide.
Until you get 4 sperm cells.
That is exactly it.
And the polar body you have to get rid of in females so that
That's right.
Have to have
Yep.
only half.
Yep, that's exactly it. So can you see the difference using this image right here? You can see that in mitosis, it goes through one process of copy and divide. So the process is different. Secondly, the result is different. It results in two cells, and these two cells are identical to each other and identical to the original. Where in meiosis, the process is different because it has two steps. As the first step where it divides and the second step where it copy and divides. And that's why it's able to narrow down into from diploid to haploid first, and then it copies that haploid throughout. And that's why in meiosis, you have from one cell, you end up having 4 cells. And these 4 cells are not identical to each other, nor are they identical to the original. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if I ask you on the test, can you tell me the difference between them?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So then you will also want to describe the female reproductive system, describe the female reproductive organs. So the ovary, the uterine tube, uterus, vagina, and other external female structures. And then students most have problems with the oogenesis, and that you'll want to be able to go through in detail. And the female reproductive system is much more difficult than the male reproductive because in the female, you're not only keeping track of the egg versus the sperm, but in the female, there are 2 reproductive cycles happening, the ovarian cycle, the menstrual cycle, okay? So there's multiple things happening that you have to keep track of, and that's why oogenesis is much more difficult to learn than spermatogenesis, because in spermatogenesis is just the sperm. Make sense?
That's why men say women are so complicated.
They're not lying.
No.
Okay. So there's that. Okay. So do you want me to spend time going through the structure or go right into oogenesis? Oogenesis. Yeah, that's usually the request. Okay. So I got this is a very old, you know, this is the diagram that I used when I was going through the learning of this process as well. It's old, but it works really well. Okay, so we're going to use it with kind of the review of this. So first of all, there are 2 documents on the navigation system, navigation site, the optional supplemental material that has really cool diagrams that I made specifically for you guys. So make sure you go in there and look at it, okay? But this one is just going to take parts at a time, and then we're going to mush it all together, okay? So the first thing that we're going to cover is oogenesis, and I've heard it be pronounced multiple ways, oogenesis or oogenesis, okay? And either way is fine as long as you know what it is, okay? So oogenesis is the development of the ovum, okay? And one major difference between oogenesis versus spermatogenesis is this happens during fetal development. It starts during fetal development. That's a huge difference. Where spermatogenesis doesn't start until puberty in males, okay? So oogenesis has already begun during that females, the mothers, fetal development, okay? So even before you are born, you already have made all the eggs you will carry in your lifetime. Unfortunately, that does mean that as you age, what also ages with you?
Your eggs.
That's right. And that's why as you get older, the likelihood of having children with Down syndrome or other genetic problems is higher, okay? And it's not true in males because males make new sperm on a regular basis, okay? All right, so this process happens during the female's fetal development, even before she's ever born, okay? So as she's forming in her mother's womb, she's going to have what's called oogonia. That's the starting cell. That's the cell that starts it all, oogonia. Okay, so these are the stem cells that will eventually become what?
Oocytes.
Yeah. Right? Eggs. Okay. So the oogonia, the stem cell, is 2N, which means it has how many chromosomes?
40.
Mm-hmm. Say it confidently. You're right. 46. Because it's a diploid. Okay. 2N meaning it has one copy and then it has another copy. So 2 copies. In other words, it has 46 chromosomes. Chromosome 1, chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 2, chromosome 3, 3, and so on. Okay, but we're talking about females here, right? So for the 23rd pair, what does the 23rd pair look like? Will always look like in a female.
XX.
That's right. Her 23rd pair is always going to be XX. Okay. All right. So the oogonia is going to undergo mitosis, and this is during fetal development, right? So it's going to undergo mitosis. And what is mitosis again?
Or it copies. Just
It's a copy and divide.
right. Yeah.
Okay? So in this oogonia, it's going to copy from 2N to become what temporarily?
2N.
2N to what? If it's copying?
Haploid.
No,
We're going to 1N.
no, 4N.
90.
Oh.
Okay, because that's copying. So it goes from 46 to
Oh, I see
92.
what you're asking now.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see. This is before the divide.
That's correct. Yep. So temporarily it's going to copy first, which means it's going to go from 2N to 4N. So we've done the copying, and now we're going to do the dividing. So when divide it, it's going to end up with 2 cells. Okay. Now, one of these cells that results from mitosis will become the primary oocyte. Okay. So listen carefully. An oogonia undergoes mitosis to result in a primary oocyte. Okay. The other cell, because it does result in 2 cells, goes back to being an oogonia and repeats that process.
oh, okay. That makes sense.
Okay. And that's why from that one oogonia, it can make lots of primary oocytes. Because it's going to divide, one goes back to dividing, the other one kind of is earmarked to become an egg. Questions? Okay, great. So during fetal development again, the oogonia undergoes mitosis and makes millions of cells to become the primary oocyte. Now, at this point, once it's made enough primary oocyte, the primary oocyte will start meiosis 1. And in the past, we call it the first meiosis, but it really is just meiosis 1. Can someone remind me what happens in meiosis 1?
You divide.
Yes, just a divide. Okay. So during the fetal development, it's getting ready to divide. The primary oocyte is getting ready to undergo meiosis 1. In other words, it's getting ready to divide. Does it finish meiosis 1?
No.
It does not. Okay. So it starts the process meiosis one to divide, but it doesn't finish. So it hasn't divided quite yet. And that's when the female is born. Okay, so before birth, shortly before birth, this process undergoes cell arrest. In other words, it freezes. Okay, so this process doesn't finish. It does start, but it does not finish. Okay, so then the female is born. When does this process restart?
Puberty.
Puberty?
Perfect. So at puberty, because what's happening at puberty?
Hormones start.
FSH.
That's exactly it. The hormones are getting high, you know, and in particular, what hormone am I talking about?
FSH.
That's right. Thank you. It's FSH. What does FSH stand for?
Follicle stimulating hormone.
Yeah, follicle stimulating hormone. It stimulates the follicles to develop. Okay, and that's what at puberty, it's the FSH that drives the primary oocyte to finish meiosis 1 and become a secondary oocyte. So at puberty, each month, FSH is going to stimulate about 20 to 25 primary oocytes to complete meiosis 1. So if it completes meiosis 1, normally, in terms of quantity, what did you do to that number of 20 to 25 that was stimulated to complete meiosis 1? You should have how many at this point? So if I have about 20 to 25 that get stimulated each month, after meiosis 1, I should have how many? Because it's just a pure divide.
Half of the amount. 10 to.
No, ma'am. From 20, I split it into 2. How many do I have?
40 to 50.
I have 40,
Double.
right? Because I took 1 and I just split it into 2. So technically I should double it, right?
Double. Yeah.
Right? Now, do I have 40 to 50 though?
No,
I don't. Why don't I?
because you got rid of the polar bodies.
That's exactly it. So you will notice that in spermatogenesis, this process would have doubled the number of sperm. Okay, because in spermatogenesis, it's about quantity over quality. In oogenesis, it's about quality over quantity. Because whatever results is going to be the home of the zygote. So you want the best egg to be the one that results. Make sense?
Yes.
Yes, Kate. Quality over quantity. That's right. So half. So when it divides, it's going to keep only one of those copy, and the other copy becomes a polar body. So this copy right here, what happens to this copy? It undergoes what?
At what's that A word? At atrevia.
Atrasia. Yep.
Atrasia. There we go.
Yep. Yep. So atrasia just means it dies. It disintegrates.
Disintegrates.
So we no longer count that. Okay. So after meiosis 1, you are working with how many secondary oocytes?
Around 20?
Yeah. 20 total or 1 specifically? Okay. So we're going to follow this secondary oocyte right here. Because the other one became a polar body and undergot under atrasia. Secondary oocyte. Okay. Now to complete meiosis, it has to go through meiosis 2. Okay. Meiosis 2, what happens in meiosis 2?
Copy and divides.
Yes, this is where you copy and divide. But there's a little clause in here. We're going to ignore these polar bodies because they go away. Okay. So it's going to go under copy and divide. However, this secondary oocyte right here is what is released during what process?
Ovulation.
Release during ovulation. True or false? The secondary oocyte that has been released during ovulation has completed meiosis.
No, false.
Correct. So it's released before it ever even starts meiosis 2. It
'Cause
does not. Yep, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's just like it finishes it during fertilization.
That's exactly it. It actually doesn't even start meiosis 2 unless it becomes fertilized. So if it does not become fertilized and it's expelled out of the body through menstruation, it never finishes meiosis. Okay, so if this secondary oocyte is released through ovulation and a sperm is able to penetrate it, what happens?
The fertilization.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Can I ask, is this chart showing that polar bodies are also copying and dividing?
It
somehow?
doesn't. It just undergoes atresia.
Okay.
Yep.
Just
So
see 3 of them there at the
yep.
on the side.
I see your question, and yes, it does show that, but it does not ever copy.
Okay.
It's just showing what would happen, which is important because that's what is supposed to happen. So meiosis is supposed to copy. So the polar body, if it weren't a polar body, it would copy itself. But because this is the female reproductive system, it does not copy itself.
Okay. Because it requires fertilization.
Partially, but also because you want to narrow, you want to only release the best that
Get rid of the bad stuff. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
To get rid of the chromosomes. Yep.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
that's actually a really good question. So
Yeah.
in this image right here, it shows equal size cells, but in reality, the cell that stays is actually a lot larger and the polar body is smaller. The polar body is just a way to get rid of the extra chromosome. So the polar body is always the smaller one, a method of getting rid of the chromosome, where all of the good stuff stays in the cell that remains the oocyte.
Yeah, because you don't want it to copy again until it has the rest of its DNA from
That's
the dad.
Yep. Okay. So these, even though in this image right here, the two ends, the circles are the same size, in reality, that's not what happens. It's just a way of getting, in the oogenesis, when it finishes meiosis 1, it releases it results in another cell that has just half the chromosome and none of the none of the organelles, none of the cytosol. So it's just a way to get rid of the chromosome and not all the stuff that a cell needs to have. Okay. All right. So back to our fertilization. So when fertilization happens, that is actually what triggers meiosis 2 to occur. So fertilization triggers meiosis 2. So in meiosis 2, we discussed that it's a copy and divide. Now, technically, does it have to go through that? Not necessarily, because you already have half the chromosome from mom, half the chromosome from dad, but it's a biological process where meiosis has to complete both of these steps. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So the secondary oocyte will go from one end and become what temporarily?
2N.
Yep. And then it's going to spit out the other end, and that end will become another polar body. And now you have the N from female and the N from male. And that comes together, and that results in 2N with the combination of mom and dad. And what do we call this?
Just zygote.
Zygote.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Questions? If it doesn't, now's a great time to ask.
Okay, so I'm just gonna start from the beginning so I can understand what's going on here. So we have oogenesis starts from fetal development before any of us are born, right?
Mhm.
Becomes oogenia, and then it goes. We produce like oocytes from to like meiosis 1, and as I see.
Wait. Take a step back.
Okay.
What oocyte are you talking about?
The primary oocyte.
Okay. So the primary starts meiosis 1. Does it ever finish it?
No, because you get born and then.
Yep. There you go. Good. Okay, now you continue.
And then when you get born, you wait until puberty.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you start mitosis. And
Start what?
Mitosis.
Of what?
Of the oogenia.
Nope. All of that has already completed once you're born.
Oh.
Yep,
Yeah.
There's no more mitosis of the oogonias.
Oh, okay. Then you start meiosis, you divide.
Yes.
And then when you divide, we have like the secondary oocyte, and there's going to be a polar body which gets eliminated, right?
Yes. Yep.
And then when it gets eliminated, then we just have to focus on the secondary oocyte.
Yep.
But then you said it doesn't finish meiosis because it is released during ovulation and it needs to get fertilized.
Yep.
And then this is where I got stuck on.
Okay. So if fertilization doesn't happen, so if there's no sperm or the sperm is not able to penetrate that egg, that egg is going to continue on its way down the female path and it's just expelled during menstruation. Nothing happens. It stays as a secondary oocyte and is released, is expelled through menstruation.
Okay, so there's going to be another polar body that gets expelled.
No.
Right?
Nope, because it doesn't ever even go through meiosis 2.
Okay. Oh, okay. So nothing happens?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So do you see how I drew it in green?
Yeah.
This green option only occurs if fertilization occurs.
Oh, okay. But we need fertilization to finish meiosis.
That's right. Yep. So if a female has her period, what egg has she released during her menstruation?
Secondary.
Yes. Why?
That's the one that's went through.
Best.
One.
Oh, is it like the quality over quantity?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, I get it now.
So each month, a female only releases how many?
One.
That's right. Each month, a female only releases one. Even though 20 to 25 go through this process, only one is ever released in ovulation. If fertilization doesn't happen, then it stays where it is. It stays as a secondary oocyte, never finishes meiosis, and boop, is expelled through menstruation. If fertilization does happen, the sperm is able to penetrate that egg, then it stimulates that egg to undergo meiosis 2, and only if fertilization happened does it undergo meiosis 2. It finishes the meiosis, copy divide, and then it combines the genetic information N from dad, N from mom, and becomes 2N again. So it went from being haploid to diploid due to the sperm's chromosomes, and now that's when we call it zygote. At this point, the zygote will undergo what process? Mitosis or meiosis?
Meiosis.
Careful.
Mitosis.
Mitosis.
Yes. Meiosis is always a reduction. Mitosis is a expansion. So this zygote is going to copy itself 2N to 2N to 2N until finally it's going to develop the brain, it's going to develop the organs, it's going to be an embryo, it's going to be a fetus, and finally it's going to be born as a baby. Oh my goodness, I'm not good at drawing babies. That's a baby, okay?
What a cute little baby.
Thanks. That's a marshmallow. I'll take that. Okay.
Some of them look like that when they're born.
Okay, other questions? Because we still have 2 more of the female reproductive phases to cover, or cycles. Okay, we'll go through this multiple times. So if you didn't get it the first time, hang in there. It's hard. No one gets it the first time, really. Okay. So what we just covered is only this right here, development of the egg. But I need you to have a basic understanding of that before I can add on development of the follicle, which is this other half right here. We really are complicated. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Is it okay if I move on?
Sure.
Okay. So keep what we just talked about on like one side of your brain. Free the other side of your brain for me. Okay. So now what we're going to cover is the development of the follicle, because it's not just ever the egg. You also have cells that surround the egg. The cells that surround the egg is called a follicle. Okay. So same thing before birth. So in other words, during fetal development, that oogonia is going to undergo mitosis, results in a primary oocyte, and another oogonia that repeats that process. Okay. Now that oocyte or oogonia is actually surrounded by follicles as well. These follicles that surround that oogonia is called the primordial follicle. Primordial follicle. Okay. Here's the thing though. During fetal development, that primordial follicle undergoes no change. So really the only thing that's changing is what?
Wait, can you go over that again?
Yes, ma'am. All right. So during fetal development, we talked about how we just finished it in the previous slide. The oogonia, which is the stem cell, undergoes mitosis to copy and divide and become a primary oocyte and another oogonia. Okay. Remember we just finished talking about that?
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay. And then what we didn't talk about, and I'm adding on another layer of information, is that it's not just that oogonia, because that oogonia is surrounded by these cells right here. Do you see these little small cells right here? Yeah? Okay. So these cells that surround the oogonia is referred to as the primordial follicle. So here's the oogonia, 2N. Surrounding the oogonia are sets of cells called the primordial follicle. Okay. Even though the oogonia right here undergoes change by undergoing mitosis, the primordial follicle does not. It stays the same. So in other words, true or false, the primordial follicle surrounds both the oogonia and the primary oocyte.
True.
It is true. Yes, Anya, it's exactly like a cell membrane, but these are cells and not the membrane. Yep. It forms a wall around the oogonia, but it is itself sets of cells. Okay, but that's a good analogy. Okay. All right. Does that make sense before I move on?
Yes.
Okay. So then at birth, it stops, right? And then at adolescent, what's another word for adolescent?
Puberty.
Yeah. So at puberty, it starts. And we already learned about this, right? The primary oocyte finishes meiosis 1 to become a secondary oocyte. Now see, in this book, it shows the actual cell much more accurate. You see the polar body is a small little dot right there. Okay, and that's why a polar body is just a method of getting rid of the chromosome, but not the hardiness of the cell itself. Okay, so the secondary oocyte right here is what is ovulated. Oh, actually, it's already said down there, so I'm not going to say that up there. The secondary oocyte is what is ovulated. If it is not fertilized, it doesn't change and it dies. If it is fertilized, it's going to go through meiosis 2, finish meiosis 2, produces another polar body, dies, and then combines the mom and dad's contributing chromosomes to become a zygote. And the zygote becomes an embryo, the embryo becomes a fetus, and so on. We just covered that. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now we're going to add another layer to that. So once it becomes a secondary oocyte, remember at puberty, what's released again? Follicle stimulating hormone. Oh, now it makes sense. Follicle stimulating hormone.
Yeah.
Not only does it cause the secondary oocyte to finish meiosis, or not only does it cause the primary oocyte to finish meiosis 1, but it's also stimulating what? The change in follicles. Follicle stimulating hormone.
Yeah.
So the follicle stimulating hormone causes it to go from a primordial follicle to become a what?
Primary follicle.
Yes, ma'am. True or false? A secondary oocyte is surrounded by primordial follicles.
False.
Correct. Did everyone understand her answer?
What was the question?
Okay. True or false? A secondary oocyte right here is surrounded by a primordial follicle.
She said false because the primary follicles develop from the FSH follicle. The
Work it through. Keep
yeah,
giving me
from-
more.
Yeah, that's all I can remember.
Okay. So it's false. Actually, can someone else say it? Maybe if she hears it from someone else, it'll make more sense.
Because the primordial follicle is before puberty, and your secondary is after puberty. Or well, after it, you're ovulating.
No, you were right. It's after puberty. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes more sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you see that? Hearing it from another student, and that's why I have you do those discussion videos. Okay. All right. So the secondary oocyte is surrounded by the primary follicle. Now, the secondary oocyte stays the same. See, secondary, secondary. Do you see that? Secondary, secondary. So the secondary is done, right? It's done with meiosis 1. It's not going to change anymore unless fertilization happens. However, what does continue to change due to the FSH is what?
The follicle.
That's right. So the first change you see is from the primordial follicle, it becomes the primary follicle. Okay. From the primary follicle, it's going to advance even further and become secondary follicle. From the secondary follicle, it's going to become a tertiary follicle. From the tertiary follicle, it's going to become a mature follicle. All the while, the egg is in what stage? Primary oocyte, secondary oocyte, zygote, or oogonia?
Secondary oocyte.
Perfect. You got it. Okay. If you didn't get it, let's see how that works. So if you pair it right here, these changes from primary to secondary to tertiary to mature, it lines up with right here. It lines up with the secondary oocyte. So while the secondary oocyte does not change, the follicles are changing. Okay, so let's cover how do they change. So from the primordial follicle, it's a simple, the tissue, it's a simple squamous epithelium. Primordial follicles have simple squamous epithelium. Okay. Primary follicles are they the same or do they look thicker?
They're stratified.
Yeah, they look thicker, right? Can you see it? It's kind of small, but you can see more than one layer, right? So it becomes stratified cuboidal epithelium. Okay. The secondary follicle, just look, tell me, what do you notice from the secondary follicle to the tertiary follicle? There's a huge difference, right? Tell me what you see.
It's even thicker and it has a fluid-filled sac.
That's exactly it. You name the two main differences. It's a lot thicker and it has this fluid-filled sac called the antrum. So this area right here is called the antrum. That's what distinguishes the secondary follicle from the tertiary follicle. Okay. Now, how many of the tertiary follicles do I have at this point each month?
Several, 20, several.
Yes. 20 to 25. Okay. Now, of these 20 to 25, only one becomes the mature follicle. The minute the first one becomes a mature follicle, it shuts down the process, the development of these other follicles. And that's why it's this process that determines the best secondary oocyte to be ovulated and released. Because of all the 20 to 25 follicle plus oocyte that develops each month, only one will complete the development of the follicle first to become a mature follicle. And it's going to rupture, releasing the egg or the secondary oocyte, while causing the other follicles to stop growing. And if they stop growing, what else stops growing? Whatever they surround. What do they surround?
The egg or the
That is right. Okay, so Kay said that quality over quantity, and you couldn't have said any more truer statements. This whole thing is about quality over quantity. And there's so many assurances that our body goes through to make sure that the best secondary oocyte is released each month.
and then if you're like some of us, they become cysts.
Oh no, no. It's the ones that don't disintegrate correctly that become cysts.
Oh, okay, so the one's left.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you can see that the follicle right here, the mature follicle, after ovulation, the egg has been expelled, right? The egg goes through the uterine tube and down the uterus and so on, right? But the follicle that remains stays in the ovary as the corpus luteum. And it has a function, but we'll talk about it in a little bit. But I need you first to understand these two cycles. You've got the development. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question? If kind of going back to oogenesis, if the sperm is penetrating before ovulation, why are we always talking about ovulation needing to be happening for pregnancy?
The sperm cannot penetrate before ovulation. It has to be ovulated first and then fertilized.
Okay.
Yep. So the sperm can't make it into the ovary, which is where these two processes are happening. So that's why you have to first ovulate, release the egg from the ovary, and then, so right here, okay, so the egg right here, the secondary oocyte has to be released and swept into the uterine tube. And as it moves along, that's where the sperm is going to go up here, and it has to fertilize the secondary oocyte right here.
Okay.
And that's why ovulation must happen first, and then fertilization. And fertilization, that's a great point. Fertilization has to happen within the uterine tube. The reason why is that it takes a few days for the egg to move down the uterine tube. And by the time the egg gets to the uterus, it's no longer viable. And that's why fertilization has to happen along here when the egg is still viable. That's a great question, though. Thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
So can you go over from the beginning just to make everything clear so I can remember?
I like how you went over it, and then the class and I help you along.
Okay. So the beginning was kind of blurry, but let me just remember.
We'll help you.
You started with how the follicles around the egg
Mhm.
right? And then after this kind of becomes blurry. And then you said there's going to be like something surrounding the follicles, something around that. I don't know. That's what you said? Or is it the
Help from classmates. Let's do it together. Classmates, help her out.
The follicle surrounds the egg or the oocyte.
Yep.
And
So
then
there's nothing. Yep. So there's nothing surrounding the follicle, but it's the follicle that surrounds the egg.
okay, and then you start with the primary oocyte. After that, we're gonna be talking about the primary oocyte and how it's
The primary oocyte develops before puberty.
Yep.
okay. Oh, okay. And then and then the FSH comes up, and for
Yeah.
the primordial follicles, and then it becomes primary follicles after puberty.
Right after puberty, yes.
Okay, got that. And then and then
The egg itself doesn't change, but the follicle grows to kind of nourish it before ovulation.
before ovulation.
Yeah.
And then it becomes oocyte to the secondary follicle. When does it become primary to secondary?
The oocyte or the follicle?
Both.
The primary, it becomes a secondary after puberty.
Yeah. And
You
then
see where it says adolescence to menopause on the chart. Everything below that happens after puberty.
okay. And then the secondary follicle.
That's when it starts growing after puberty. So your follicle starts changing to nourish the egg itself. The egg stays the same, but the follicle changes to help, or well, it essentially till ovulation.
Wow, there's a lot of follicles. I was just missing out so much.
So I think I see where your disconnection is. I think you're confusing. You're switching back and forth the oocyte and the follicle.
Yes.
Okay. So when you're going through this, just go through the ones that are in the blue. So you keep it straight that everything you talk about in the blue section is just the egg, the oocyte. Because this is you highlight like 90% of what students find confusing. Okay, so you're not the only one. So it's because the terms are so similar. You've got the secondary oocyte, the secondary follicle, the primary oocyte, the primary follicle, and they're not aligned. They're not at the same, because they're talking about different things. So I think the biggest thing that you're stumbling with right now is being able to really make sure you know that when you're talking about secondary, what secondary you're talking about. Are you talking about secondary oocyte or secondary follicle?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're reviewing this, you got to make sure you go through just this blue section first. And then once you have a strong understanding of that and you're confidently saying secondary oocyte only, then you add on the follicle.
Okay.
All right. All right. So, and keep looking at this. Sometimes it helps to just go through one.
Yeah, I think I can get it now when I see the
Yep.
blue space, because I've been just
Yeah.
looking at this chart this whole time.
Yes. I did that too when I was learning this. I kept on confusing oocyte with follicles. So it helps to kind of color coordinate them. So when you rewrite these notes, make sure you write anything that's oocyte in one color and anything in follicle in a different color. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Yeah. All right. So then, now I have to add on
menstruation.
Yeah. Now I have to add on a third part. You ready to go into the third part? So we talked about the development of the egg first. I just finished talking about, I know, I'm so sorry, Katie. So I started out with the development of the egg. I just finished development of the follicle. Now I have to add on a third layer of information, okay? So just hang on to your seats. All right, so the third portion that I have to add on is menstruation cycle. Okay, so far we've only done the ovarian cycle, but the ovarian cycle had two parts, right? It had the development of the egg and the development of the follicle. So those two parts were only about the ovarian cycle. Now I have to add on the uterine cycle. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at what happens to the uterus lining. Okay, and hopefully you've read and you've learned that the uterus, it had the endometrium actually, endometrium consists of two layers. Okay, so the endometrium consists of two layers, the stratum bacillus, which is always there. You can call it bacillus, whatever, as long as you know what it is, okay? And then the stratum functionalis, which is not always there. This one is always there. This one will build the stratum functionalis every month, okay? So depending on what day of the month it is, your uterine lining is going to look different, okay? So the uterine cycle has the following. It's got the menstrual phase, it's got the pre-ovulatory phase, then it's got ovulation and the post-ovulatory phase, which is divided into the secretory phase and the luteal phase, which for some reason isn't written on here. Okay. All right. Are we ready to go on to it?
Sure.
You're like, do we have a choice? No, you don't have a choice. All right. So the easiest way to do this is to look at this chart. And of course, I didn't add it in there. So let me look for it really quick. So you will find in the navigation, I created this other diagram here for you to look at if the first one I talked about didn't work. Because sometimes it just takes multiple different ways of doing it to get it. But this is the one I'm most proud of. I love, oh, you cannot see it because I didn't share it with you. That's okay. I will just copy it and put it here. Oops. New slide. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. How many of you remember seeing this chart in the navigation?
Yes.
This, I think, pulls everything together very beautifully. Okay, maybe make it bigger so you all can see it. Oh, but it's not. Okay. Let me stop sharing. Screen. Okay. And then go here. Now, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Okay. Make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is a cognitive map to distinguish what is going on. So the blue colored area is what we talked about in oogenesis. And then the other one was follicular genesis. And now we're going to add the uterine wall lining to it. And what's really nice about this chart is that it divides it up by the phases. So you have the menstrual phase. Okay, the menstrual phase belongs to what? The uterine cycle or the ovarian cycle?
Now repeat that. Sorry.
Nope, that's okay. The menstrual phase, is it technically a part of the ovarian cycle or the uterine cycle?
Uterine, like she's.
Yes, exactly. Because you see it's gray, right? And that's what I want you to associate with. So from day one in a month, which is 28 to 30 days, day 1 to day 5 is the menstrual phase. What's happening here? The stratum functionalis is being shed. Okay. So you have your period. Okay. Then in the proliferative phase, that's when the body is getting ready. It's assuming each month, the uterus is assuming each month that there could be a potential zygote that's going to attach to its lining, and it has to develop it, right? So it's preparing each month for this process. So the estradiol or the estrogen is going to cause the regeneration of the stratum functionalis. Then ovulation happens.
And estrogen comes from the follicle, right?
Yes. Very good. Exactly. Yep. And then you have the secretory phase and then the premenstrual phase. Okay. Where if we were to look at the ovarian cycle, both the secretory phase and the premenstrual phase is referred to as the luteal phase. Okay. And the proliferative and menstrual phase is referred to as the follicular phase. It should make sense at this point why it's called the follicular phase, because the majority of change that happens is to what?
The follicle.
Right. It goes from primordial follicle to primary follicle to secondary follicle to mature to tertiary follicle and then to a mature follicle. Okay, and that's why it's called follicular phase. Okay. All right. So make sure you use this table right here to kind of learn what belongs to what and what is called what. Okay. Back to here. Okay. So this image right here is really important because it's showing you the role of the hormones. Okay. So let's go through the role of the hormones in both the ovarian and the uterine cycle. Okay. The uterine cycle is pretty straightforward. It's just the menstrual phase, the preovulatory phase, the ovulation, post-ovulatory phase. The secretory phase, which is what we talked about earlier. But what is more complex is to link both of those cycles together through what hormone does what. Okay, so you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so we start off with what hormone?
FSH.
Yes, ma'am. FSH is going to start the development of the primordial follicle to become the primary follicle, to the secondary follicle, and then finally to the mature follicle. Okay. Now, the follicles are going to release what?
Estrogen.
Yeah. And guess what estrogen does?
Builds the lining of the uterus.
That's right. Do you see how beautiful the human body is? It's like amazing how things work. Okay. Because as the follicles are developing, it knows, it's telling the uterus, which, can't talk, right? So how does it communicate with each other? It communicates through the release of hormones. So the follicle releases estrogen, and estrogen preps the uterine lining. And what is it prepping for?
A baby.
Yeah, potential pregnancy, right? So the FSH is going to continue the follicle to develop. And when the follicle develops, it's going to actually cause the other follicles to stop developing. So that's why, although there's about 20 to 25 that goes through this process, only one becomes a mature follicle because it stops the others from developing. Okay. So estrogen, okay. Now estrogen is prepping the uterine lining. The FSH was really high at first. So FSH was really high up here, but FSH is going to start to go down right about here. When FSH goes down, what's going to happen? What replaces it?
LH.
That's right. So LH is going to start to go up here. And it's because of the LH that drives what to happen?
Ovulation.
That's right. So FSH goes down, LH goes up. Okay. Now, once ovulation happens, the corpus luteum right here is maintained by LH. Okay. So the LH causes the ovulation and it maintains the corpus luteum. What does corpus luteum produce?
Progesterone.
Yeah. And progesterone is what maintains the thickness of this lining. Estrogen causes it to form, but it's progesterone that maintains the thickness of this lining. Okay. But here's the problem. Estrogen levels are going to start to go down. When estrogen levels go down, LH goes down. If LH levels go down, what shrinks?
Corpus luteum.
Yeah. And if corpus luteum shrinks, it no longer produces what?
Progesterone.
And if it no longer produces progesterone, nothing maintains that thickness. So what happens?
Menstruation.
Yeah. So you're probably thinking, well, what if pregnancy happens? Great question. If the sperm fertilizes the egg, okay, and becomes a zygote, that zygote is going to attach itself along the wall, the lining of the uterus, and it's going to release HCG, human cortical gonadotropin. Okay, and HCG replaces LH. So although LH goes down, it replaces it, so it maintains what?
The uterine wall.
By maintaining what hormone?
Estrogen.
Mm-mm.
Oh. Ooh. I guess progesterone then. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So, because the luteinizing hormone is what maintains, let me do it in a different color, otherwise it'll be confusing. Okay. So the luteinizing hormone maintains the corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum maintains the progesterone. But if the luteinizing hormone is no longer there, then HCG replaces the luteinizing hormone, which maintains the corpus luteum, which maintains the progesterone. And it stays there for as long as the baby's there. The fetus is there. Okay, questions?
No.
Okay. All right, let's finish up with the male repro. Once you have the female, male repro is going to seem so easy. Okay, can we go through the male spermatogenesis?
Sure.
Okay, so you start off with a sperm cell, a stem cell, the spermatogonium. And the same thing, it undergoes mitosis. which copies and divides. One becomes the type B, and that's what will move on to become the sperm cell. And the other one stays to continue that copying process. Repeats that process. Now, I jumped right into it, but this starts at what period of time?
Puberty.
Yeah. Where in females, it starts during fetal development. And it stops in fetal development, where this starts at puberty and continues
For the rest of
throughout.
their
Yep, that's right. Throughout male's life. Okay. So once mitosis is done, it's going to undergo meiosis 1. And meiosis 1 is what again? Remind me? Divide. So from the primary spermatocyte, which is 2N, it's going to become
our power went out.
Huh? I'm sorry?
I thought our power went out. I panicked for a minute. I was like,
Oh, no. So from this primary spermatocyte, which is 2N, it's going to undergo meiosis 1 and become just what? N.
Yeah.
And then it's going to undergo meiosis 2, which is what?
Copy and divide.
So these are going to temporarily become 2N. That's the copy. And then divide is when they split again. No polar bodies here, right? Because here it's what over what?
It's quantity over quality.
Yeah, that's right. Not quality. No, it's quantity. Here it's about quantity. The more chances it makes its way up to the egg, the better chances of passing on its chromosome. Okay. So copy and divide. But here, let's go back to the primary spermatocyte. Just like in the oogonia, I talked about the 23rd chromosome. The 23rd chromosome is going to be what here?
Y.
Y and what?
X and Y.
X and Y. Exactly. So that means that when it divides, one will go over here, one will go over here, and if it copies, it's going to look something like this. So who determines the sex of a child?
The father.
Yep. Someone should have told Henry VIII. Right? Okay. And that's it. How easy is that compared to the oogenesis?
Men are so much simpler.
Yep. Okay. All right. And then it goes through spermatogenesis. So this is spermagenesis, and then how it becomes mature and becomes a sperm cell is spermatogenesis, which is another step, but again, pretty straightforward. Okay. Essentially, it develops a flagella, and that's when it becomes a mature sperm due to the development of flagella. Okay, ladies. Okay, so any questions?
Do we need to know the I can't think of the terms right now, that anatomy of the testicle too, like where the sperm develop into that canal and all that?
Oh, yes, definitely. You do want to know about the rete testes.
Yes.
You want to know about the epididymis, and then you want to know that you have the germinal epithelium. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You definitely want to know those. Yep.
Because there was, I'm pretty sure there was questions on our quiz about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.